He's tired.
Left to go in the fight. Foreman tries. Slip.
No comment, Howard. No comment? Okay.
Why is it so hot in here? Who said that?
Son and the Holy Spirit. Hallelujah.
What if George Foreman never retired? We know what happened in 1977, but what if George had won that day in San Juan? The end of the 70s would be quite different. The fate of the title scene, Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, George's own mental and physical health, his coming to God. George Foreman is about to send shockwaves through the timeline. In our What If, Foreman stops Young on his feet in that 7th round after wobbling him when the referee steps in, unlike in reality. He also does not have his life-changing experience after the fight. I'd imagine Foreman remaining in the division will unfold something like this. After stopping Jimmy Young, George Foreman continues on in 1977 towards a rematch with Muhammad Ali. As per a verbal agreement with Ali and a contendership standing, Foreman first has to defeat Ken Norton. He's done it before, so it should be easy, right? This time around, Norton remains extremely cautious and boxes Foreman behind his jab, much to the frustration of Big George. It only delays the inevitable, as George does eventually catch up to Norton in the 5th and score the stoppage as the Black Hercules falls apart after the knockdown. This concludes George's 1977, and he's expected to face Muhammad Ali for the title in 1978. Speaking of Ali, he beats Ernie Shavers as in reality, but draws more concern over his fledgling health and ability. In 1978, Muhammad Ali chooses to defend his crown against Leon Spinks, pushing the Foreman match back. In this reality, he wins this matchup and appears to turn back the clocks as he did in their rematch from reality. Larry Holmes decisions Jimmy Young convincingly and advertises it as how Ali should have handled Young back in 1976. George Foreman, meanwhile, tunes up against Ernie Shavers. Foreman is decked by a monstrous blow, and it's looking like we've got another Foreman Lyle on our hands until Big George decimates the Black Destroyer in incredible fashion, shortly after rising from the canvas. Muhammad Ali has a dilemma. Will he face Foreman or Holmes? He's put off the Foreman match too long and goes with it, but wishes he could have tested himself against his old protege. It's fight night. Can Muhammad Ali pull off another miracle and pickle George Foreman again? Does he have enough left in the tank? Ali enters the fight in shape similar to his fight with Spinks. He's on his toes and dishing punches, but to no effect, as he's lost his ability to sting against a chin like Foreman's. Anytime Ali retreats to the ropes, Foreman backs up to center ring, or straight up pulls Ali out there with him. Ali endures a beating but won't go down. To Foreman's detriment, he still can't pace himself and tires by the championship rounds. This is where Ali gets some offense in, but not enough. Ultimately, an exhausted Foreman wins when Angie Dundee steps in to stop the beating. George is once again the heavyweight champion of the world, and now the most hated man due to his thrashing of the hero Ali, just as Larry Holmes was in reality. Ali contemplates retirement, but ultimately decides he wants to attempt to become a 3-time champ and enforces his rematch clause. Unfortunately for him, there isn't an honest doctor in the world who will clear him after his performance, and he's forced into retirement via his license being indefinitely suspended. A defiant Ali rides off into the sunset with these final slurred words.
I had the answer
I wouldn't beat George in our rubber match, but you'll never get to see it. It would have been a real catch. I wonder what Ali had planned for George. I guess we'll never know. 1979 opens with George choosing to defend his title first against Larry Holmes. George, in the pre-fight, boasts of how he retired both Ali and Frazier, egging on the public and now embracing his villainy. Ali's protege shouldn't be too much a bother. Larry exclaims that he'll avenge his mentor, making him the automatic, beloved hero. On fight night, Larry uses his legendary jab to keep Foreman at bay and wobbles the champ here and there. Foreman swings wildly and misses as he looks to be getting outclassed. George catches up eventually and drops Holmes with some vicious blows. To everyone's surprise, especially George's, Larry rises from the dead and gets up to box George's head off, earning him great admiration as the crowd cheers him on. When the smoke clears, Larry Holmes is the new undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, and Foreman looks bamboozled. He didn't realize Larry had come so far and was made for the big time. Larry Holmes is considered the successor to Muhammad Ali and has achieved the status he earned in reality but never received. He is the people's champion. Meanwhile, in his locker room, Foreman has his coming to God moment and determines to retire. Talks of a rematch begin, but Larry insists that he beat George convincingly enough and looks toward new ventures. The WBA threatens to strip him and he doesn't give a damn. Thus, the title is splintered. In a move that influences him to continue boxing, George is awarded the WBA title, which makes him the first three-time title holder. He is mandated to defend it first against Leon Spinks. He does just that with a first-round knockout. George has one more defense against Big John Tate and finds himself struggling to catch up to his taller, slicker opponent. He ultimately does catch up and knock Tate out late in the fight, but this was the last straw for George. He feels he shouldn't have struggled against such an opponent and begins looking to take his game to the next level. This is made all the more obvious to him as he watches Larry Holmes improve even further with good, adversity-overcoming wins against Ken Norton and Ernie Shavers. This concludes the 70s. The 1980s opened with George scoping for a new trainer. He compromises with Archie Moore and the old mongoose steps down but remains in the camp as an advisor. Very humble. George watches Hilmer Kenty become lightweight champion and Thomas Hearns become welterweight champion. As he nears the end of his mandatory defense time limit, he approaches the man who trained those two world champions and asks him to be his trainer, pledging himself to his teachings. This man is Emmanuel Stewart, who accepts and admits he's always wanted to train a fighter like George. They immediately get to work on combining George's old school technique with Manny's focus on utilizing range, the jab, and a deadly right hand. The new Kronk, George Foreman's mandatory defense, comes against Mike Weaver, and he easily obliterates his man in the opening round. It was surgical and takes the boxing world by storm. Notable in the fight was how patient George appeared to be, not forcing anything, and also how hesitant and merciful he was as he didn't seem eager to hurt his man as he had in the past. The Rumble in the Jungle, the Holmes fight, and Stewart's teachings have forced change in his mind and soul. Larry Holmes defends his unified lineal, ring, and WBC titles 3 times in dominant showings, only appearing to improve. One of those was against Muhammad Ali, who managed to return against the odds. Sounds fishy here. He was thrashed by Holmes, as in reality, and an investigation on the affair commences due to Ali's tragic death in the ring. Yes, the greatest, suffers an untimely demise. Holmes, overnight, becomes more hated than Foreman despite his apologetic response. The door is open for Foreman to turn his image around, and he starts by shaving his head, publicly living out his Christianity and showcasing his charisma in media appearances. Still, long way to go before he wins everyone over. George ends the year in December with another brilliant showing, this one a second-round knockout of Harry Coetzee, who did manage to land his bionic right hand once, but to no effect against George's chin and new calmness under pressure. In this bout, George also showed off good combination punching as he overwhelmed the South African. In 1981, the Foreman and Holmes camps failed to reach an agreement on unification. This mostly comes down to the outrageous demands and politicking of Don King on Larry's side. George defends the WBA title once, against James "Quick" Tillis in a second-round knockout. The boxing ability of Tillis did nothing to disrupt Foreman as he remained easily focused and composed. George has one more defense against Ronaldo Snipes and overcomes some awkward opposition to score a third-round knockdown. Snipes jokingly brags after how he took the new George the furthest. Larry Holmes also defends twice, beating both Trevor Berbick and Leon Spinks. Fans are growing impatient, waiting for unification in this new era the media has dubbed to be the Age of Darkness. Everyone despises both Foreman and Holmes, as two heels dominate the marquee division. A hero is yearned for by the public. (1982) was opened by the Pride and the Glory. After a nasty build-up, Larry Holmes convincingly wins a legendary one for the books against Jerry Cooney and looks to be at his peak. George Foreman, meanwhile, overcomes the incredible hand speed and ability of the young Michael Dynamite Dokes to score a 7th-round stoppage win. Dokes impressed in his first big venture, but Foreman emerged to be more so impressive. His stamina, a glaring issue in the past, was now no longer a bother as he remained fresh against a younger challenger. Foreman appears to have reached a peak higher than that of his 1973 and 74 forms under the wing of Manny Stewart now, and his new personality is shifting the pendulum on his public perception. To the pleasure of the boxing world, George and Larry finally reach an agreement to fight for unification. George lives and breathes the wisdom of Manny Stewart for his shot at revenge, and Larry does the same under his new trainer, Eddie Futch. Larry fired Richie Giachetti after he discovered his training taping conversations with him to turn over to a grand jury in a Don King investigation. Larry obviously felt betrayed. I mention this in detail because I wish I had back in the 80s timeline. Well, now you know. In the build-up, George wins over the public when it's leaked he's been supporting Ali's family after the tragedy. And Larry loses his mind. He too has been supporting the Ali family, but no one cares, and he calls Foreman a fake who is still the mean monster he was years earlier. Foreman keeps his cool. George and Larry clash in the greatest heavyweight fight since 1975's Thrilla in Manila, at least by standard of excitement. Larry's jab is nearly nullified by Foreman's new crab shell guard in conjunction with pawing to deflect. However, Larry does well to absorb Foreman's power again. Larry starts to counter well, but is once again nullified when George regroups and fights behind his own jab. Larry wears away and is dropped. He answers and is dropped again almost immediately. He answers at 9 this time to recuperate, but George closes in like a bloodthirsty shark and drops Holmes a third time for the TKO by 3 knockdowns. This was all in the 15th and final round, with the crowd cheering on George, a mirror of how they cheered Larry in their first bout. How the tables turn. George Foreman is once again the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, and now a legit 3-time undisputed champ. Still, he took some considerable damage from the Eastern Assassin and plans to wait out his mandatory. Also with this win did the public finally, fully acknowledge George and side with him as the people's champion. (1983) sees George only defend once against terrible Tim Witherspoon. It's a battle of similar styles, and George really has to grind this one out as Tim is in top shape. He wins the decision behind a couple point-boosting knockdowns, but Witherspoon's performance has fans wondering if Foreman's age is showing. The IBF deliberates between awarding Larry Holmes or George Foreman their new title, and ultimately decide on George to boost their credibility. Larry Holmes takes this personally and says as much after his thrashing of Marvis Frazier. He wins all 4 of his comeback tour fights and has stepped into his role as the division's top heel. In 1984, George sets out to be more of a fighting champion. Now 35 years old, the world is eager to see if age is catching up or if Tim Witherspoon was really that good. Up first for George is the Louisville Rage, Greg Page, who was open about how he was crushed when his hero Muhammad Ali was retired by George. He dedicates the fight to Ali. Page's equal size and boxing ability pay dividends early, but George closes the gap and shows his championship merit by overwhelming the challenger and stopping him in the 9th. George, in the post-fight, says how he respects Page for his ability and love for Ali. A humble George also credits Ali as one of his own heroes, a fact he never admitted earlier. Up next, George halts the next big thing, Pinklin Thomas, with a decision win. Pinklin made a good showing with his jab and chin, but was ultimately too green for the evolved champion and lost his O. Foreman ends the year by stopping James Bone Crusher Smith. Smith held any time the pressure rose, but ran out of luck in the 10th round when a patient Foreman finally clipped him. The year does well to boost George's legacy, but questions remain on if he's getting too old. Larry Holmes continues ascending the ranks again. In 1985, Larry Holmes and Carl the Truth Williams meet in an eliminator to determine George's mandatory. It goes the same as it did in reality, but this time, Carl gets the decision. It's controversial and derails Larry's title shot. His saltiness after the bout further ruins his public image. When George and Carl meet, Williams tries to fight him the same way he did Larry, but is knocked out in the 3rd round as he ventures in a little too close. He rises, but is waved off on spaghetti legs. His demands for a rematch are not taken seriously. George next welcomes the challenge of Michael Spinks, who's looking to make history as he did in reality. The Jinx does a good enough job early on by getting in and getting out with his attacks, but is caught by a stiff blow in the 6th. Because George is one of the deadliest finishers ever, Spinks doesn't survive and is knocked out. Don King pulls some strings to get Larry Holmes a title shot behind the controversial Carl Williams loss. The ball is in George's court. In 1986, George shocks the world by retiring, as opposed to having a rubber match with Larry. Foreman, a legend of the sport loved by all, is granted champion emeritus status by the 3 sanctioning bodies. 63 wins, 2 losses, with a combined 16 title defenses, 14 of which were in his 3rd and most recent reign. Holmes begs George not to run out on him, but to no avail. The titles are all vacated and ultimately gathered by Mike Tyson, as in reality. Larry retires after losing to Tyson. Tyson reigns for 4 years, and George announces a comeback in 1989. He wants to become the oldest heavyweight champion ever. In 1990, 40 years, a 11-month-old George Foreman cashes in his champion emeritus status and challenges Mike Tyson for the undisputed crown in Tokyo. Luckily for George, this is the same busted Tyson who fell to Buster Douglas in reality. Much to George's surprise, Mike is standing right in front of him, and he capitalizes. George knocks Tyson out in the second round behind 3 knockdowns and shocks the world. It's a near mirror of the Sunshine Showdown against Joe Frazier back in 1973. He is now a 4-time undisputed champion, the oldest heavyweight champion ever, and widely considered the greatest of all time. His retirement is expected, but he announces that he wants to fight Larry Holmes and finish their rivalry. Larry catches wind and gets into shape. Don King insists Foreman rematch Tyson first, but it falls apart when Tyson gets into trouble over Desiree Washington and is imprisoned for sexual assault. Yes, it happens earlier in this timeline. In 1991, Larry Holmes has a tune-up in which he bamboozles Ray Mercer, and the Foreman fight is signed after. Larry promises he'll cement himself and end the trilogy as he would have back in 1985. Despite this, the two gentlemen are rather civil and mature en route to their bout. George has a last-minute tune-up of his own against Jerry Cooney and blasts him as he did in reality. It's a message without words needed from George. Cooney pushed Larry to the limit, and George eviscerated him. It's the career twilight for both legends, as it's retirement for either, win, lose, or draw, as both camps have said. George attempts to walk Larry down, but the Easton assassin counters by retreating to the ropes and lashing out as he did against Ray Mercer. George adapts, remembering the rope-a-dope, and pulls Larry center ring. He begins chipping away at Holmes, but Larry answers adversity every time and uses his jab to level the field. George adapts again and paused to nullify the jab. This is a chess match of legendary proportions, and the crowd shows their appreciation as it goes down. Larry turns back the clock and empties the tank by dancing and combo punching. He tags George, but doesn't hurt him. George gets some big shots in that back Larry up. Who wants it more? It goes to the cards. And after 12 rounds of two legends putting on one final great show, Larry Holmes is awarded the decision and is the new oldest heavyweight champion in history at 42 years, 1 month old. This fight was in December. He's also a 2-time undisputed champion. The two legends embrace and retire as promised. George sporting a record of 65-3 with 17 career title defenses and 4 undisputed title reigns. Undeniable GOAT status there. After a 10-year-long investigation into the tragic, negligent event in which Muhammad Ali succumbed to his injuries at the hands of Larry Holmes, Don King is indicted on the strings he pulled to get Ali cleared, banished from the sporting world, and imprisoned. And that's how I saw it. Two legends carrying the greatness of the Golden Age further into the 80s and 90s, which is actually kind of what they did in reality anyway. George Foreman and Larry Holmes never fighting is probably the second most profound missing chapter in heavyweight history. The first, in my own opinion at least, is Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe. I covered that back in episode 4 of this series. You can watch that by clicking or tapping the bubble in the top right or scrolling to the bottom of the description. or you can wait till the end of the video where you'll see the entire playlist. Now, what would you do differently? What do you want to see next in this series? I'm all ears. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit the like button. It goes a long way in growing BoxingPedia. We got to get in that algorithm. If you want more, subscribe and hit the bell button for all of my notifications. I promise I'm worth your time. If you want early access, exclusive emotes, and more, join my channel members, my champs, by hitting the join button. Again, trust me, it's worth your time. You'll be seeing their names after this, and you can see your name join their ranks soon. This has been the Charles Jackson, author of the Boxing Encyclopedia, and I'll see you next time. Stay frosty until we meet again.